Godmothered. The latest. Now, I was going to say the latest release for Disney Plus, but this feels like it was supposed to come out in theaters. Do you know anything about the history of this?
I do not know anything about the history of this, and I haven't really had time to research it. Um, this is from like, the director of Bridget Jones' Baby, Sharon Maguire, and it's her first Disney feature. And in the IMDb trivia, it says premise is similar to Elf and Enchanted. And to that, I say yes, sure. I mean, if you had to compare or describe it to somebody, okay.
Well, I mean, but it's also similar to every fish out of water story you've ever seen.
Sure,
right?
sure. But putting it in like a fantasy, kind of element or realm with certain, I wouldn't say iconic figures, but more like kind of well-known kind of staple fantasy type figures, or at least titles. This is it's like, here's something we haven't covered yet. Let's try and mine that field. But Sharon Maguire is the director. And as I was watching this, and I found out this during the credits that come up right away, I felt like this feels like a very, and nothing wrong with this at all, but this feels like a very female-centric movie, because I mean, most of the characters are females, and again, totally fine, welcome. But it's also very, it seems like it's very, from behind the scenes, very female-centric. The writer is female. I'm not sure about not all the producers, because one of the executive producers is Ivan Reitman. Yeah, I mean, okay, so I don't know how far it goes down the line as far as female involvement, but definitely the writers and the director. And honestly, I mean, I think that a movie like Godmothered is definitely, I think, needed, and it fits within the whole Disney Plus, I would say maybe, a certain target audience. So that being said, I mean, let's just say that we are not the target audience, but I'm sure we know people like them.
Well, I'll disagree a little bit. It's definitely true that I'm not the target audience, but I am not beyond being target audience adjacent for the kind of film that this could have been. This movie is not for me, because I definitely disagree with a lot of the messaging that comes in, particularly towards the end. It's a very odd movie for Disney to make, especially because it seems to be apologizing for the very kinds of films that made it famous. And I have a real problem with that. I understand it's very much a movie of the moment, but I don't think it's flattering towards women necessarily. I think that it's too sloppy in terms of its storytelling and premise to be taken seriously by the people who might want to have their minds changed by it. So if you're trying to say, yeah, this is a fantasy for little girls, that's fine. But if you're trying to present this to someone who says, women can do it all and have it all, and here's a great allegory for why we need to change certain things, I think that a lot of the, critical, let's say, men would sit down and watch it and be like, are you kidding? This makes no sense. And even the messaging is heavy-handed and poorly conceived.
Oh, it is definitely heavy-handed, and it's very cliched. I mean, it's checking off so many. I mean, maybe it totally is a Disney movie because it's checking off so many boxes. Is a parent or parents dead? Yes. It's like, is there a broken marriage and a single mother? Yes. And so it's like they have some kind of diagram. If so, if answered yes, go down to.
But it's funny because I watched this with my wife, and when early on, when we see Isla Fisher's family, and it's her sister. I think I don't
Yeah, I
even
think
know,
it's sister. Yeah,
because they
I
never
think it
really
is.
explicitly say it. You just kind of infer that it's the sister. She might have been referred to as auntie whatever,
Yeah, she
but
was referred to as aunt. Could be not related. Could be good
right, it
friend.
could be college
Considered
roommate
aunt.
who's like
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so much like a sister, she's an aunt. And then
yeah.
the two young daughters.
Yeah.
And I immediately thought, you know, great, dad's dead. And then like right after that, they have the scene where Jillian Bell as the fairy godmother, Eleanor, is talking to Isla Fisher's character, and it comes out that, oh, well, my husband may have, you know, we may have fallen apart and he may have run off with his Pilates instructor, which is also a cliche in these kinds of movies. That exact phrasing, you know, 20-year-old Pilates instructor.
In this case, a specific cliche, but yeah.
Right. And then my wife turned to me and said, aha, they're changing it up. And then, you know,
No.
20 minutes later, I'm like, no, they didn't. That's
Yeah, exactly.
But even, you know,
Yeah.
the very beginning of the film where it's the
In the motherland.
narrator, yeah, in the mother, which is so weird and vaguely, you know, nationalistic in its phrasing, the motherland. You know, it's the godmother's realm. The
Yeah.
narrator is talking about Eleanor and her journey and all this other stuff.
Mhm.
But you know, kind of doing it in a hip, ironic kind of way. And even
Yeah.
that dialogue is cliched. I thought to myself, I could write this movie, and I don't know what it is. Maybe I just haven't put in my dues or taken the time to write a screenplay. But I feel like if I were to write a screenplay, I would want it to be something better than this. But maybe I just need to lower my expectations about what's required to get work at Disney and just write the damn thing.
And the narration doesn't really fit. I don't know. It seemed maybe because it's coming from June Squibb, who if you're trying, you know, not to be ageist or anything like that, but you know, if I am, I guess so be it. But if you're trying to be like what you just said is kind of hip or, you know, I don't know, of the time as far as the narration, it literally just seemed like your grandmother's trying to be cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and as far as the ageist thing, you and I are both closer to June Squibb than the target audience.
So there we go.
Yes.
That's to support my ageist agenda, I guess. Unintentional.
It's usist.
It's usist. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, overall, it's interesting to see what actors are showing up in this movie. You know, Jillian Bell is the youngest godmother, so she's you know, if we're going to be literal, she's like a 30-something godmother, where all the other godmothers in her training class were, you know, in their 70s, I guess, or 60s at least.
Was one of them, and I didn't look this up either, I should have, but from the voice, and I kind of recognized her face, but she was much older than the last time I think I saw her, was one of the godmothers Maria from Sesame Street?
Oh, wow. Geez, you're really gonna. Nah, I don't know.
I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll put
Yeah,
that in the
I'll have
post
to look that
notes
up
somehow.
too. The one sitting next to her.
Right. Well, there were two sitting like
Yeah,
right
two.
behind
Yeah,
her. Yeah.
yeah. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
But
Good question.
and it, you know, that would have been the most fascinating thing I think about the movie. But you know, let me ask
Yeah.
you this, because
Yes, sir.
let's talk about this premise,
Yeah.
because it's the thing that I don't understand. Okay, so in the realm of the godmothers,
Uh-huh.
the motherland,
Uh-huh.
the premise is that they have not been needed in so long
Mm-hmm.
that the godmother profession is in danger. The godmother training program is in danger of being shut down, and all the godmothers in training may have to become tooth fairies or something, or
Yes.
you know, kind of not outsourced, but just moved around to a different part of the fantasy organization.
Right.
And so when they get this news from the headmistress, played by Jane Curtin,
Mm-hmm.
who's, you know, always fun to see,
Yeah.
and not fun to see wasted in a movie like this,
Uh,
she, Eleanor, the Bell character, refuses to believe that no one needs a godmother. She goes to the archives, where
Archives.
keeps all the letters, and they're all empty, except she finds the last letter, which is from Isla Fisher's character.
Well, yeah, when she was 10 years old.
When she was 10, but
30 something.
Right.
Mackenzie. Yeah.
Mackenzie. But
Yeah.
because I guess there's no date stamp on the letter. I don't think there is. Plus, they have no real concept of time or modernity in Godmotherland.
Mm-hmm.
Eleanor doesn't know that there's no longer a 10-year-old girl out there needing a godmother. She's
Yeah.
in her 30s. But my question is, they never address when people stopped needing godmothers, why, and how there could be this massive. You would think that if their business is literally drying up, there'd be someone out there like searching for every scrap of hope that they could keep this thing going. But Eleanor finds it on accident. uh I don't understand the basic setup for this story. Do you
That
get
would
it?
have been that. No, I don't. I mean, that point would have been, to be blunt, that point would have been cool. Just to figure out, even if it was in like an opening animated sequence or something. Once upon a time, fairy godmothers were utilized and needed, and we had a rapport with humans, and blah blah blah. Just like, when did people stop writing letters to Santa? Kids. So it's that kind of thing. I mean, sending correspondence, letters, or whatever to fairy godmothers. I mean, I personally have never heard of that kind of thing, but I mean, it is being, you could parallel it definitely with a Santa thing. So yeah, I mean, if so, when did that happen, and what have they been doing since, and why are they even training if they aren't doing what they typically have been doing? Like, why is there a class? It's like, and I get it's to possibly prepare you to be a tooth fairy, which I agree. I think that would be a cool job. One of the characters said that. It's like, hey, it's not that bad. I mean, you're working at night and you're just slipping things under the pillow, and I think that would be great. But I guess, what, Dwayne Johnson and John Cena covered that, something like that.
Was John
But
Cena in Tooth Fairy too?
I think he was. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Think so, or some other wrestler. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah. So yes, some context, some backstory, some world building would have been helpful.
And I think I hadn't thought about this until you mentioned it, but I think the letter writing, that's more of the Santa realm. The godmother thing is typically not even necessarily in the realm of wishes, but it's, if they had gone that route and say people stopped wishing for godmothers, or something like that, because they typically in past Disney stories, they kind of manifest when the heroine, the damsel, is in distress and just needs it the most. The godmother kind of shows up, right, out of the blue.
Yes. When you wish upon a star type stuff. Even, I forget if this was in the movie, but just like kind of wishing out loud, Godmother, if you can hear me, I really need you right now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think there was one of those moments.
Yeah, or not even for a godmother, but just putting a wish out into the universe,
Right,
like, oh,
right,
kind of like the genie in the lamp, which they do.
Right.
I did like the genie joke about, with the iPhone.
Yeah.
Is there a genie in there? Don't
Right.
don't let him hear you, or
Right.
don't answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that kind of context would have been helpful, along with some kind of an understanding of the extent and the limitation of the powers that these creatures,
Yeah.
I'll call them creatures, women,
Beings.
have.
Let's
Beings,
be
yeah.
nice.
Yeah,
Beings.
I don't mean to infer
They're
that
all women.
creatures
Let's
should-
call
yeah.
them creatures.
Well, but it's kind of like the Marvel universe and Thor.
Right,
Like,
right.
we've
Is it
understood them as gods, but they're aliens.
gods?
But
Yeah.
whatever.
Beings.
So yes, beings. I'll just call them women. I'll give them the respect that they deserve,
There we
because
go.
they are.
They're women. Identifiable.
Yeah. It'd be funny if there was some kind of a joke in there about why are there no godfathers or something like that.
Well, you ever look at a Ken doll? It's kind of like that.
Oh God. But so she comes to
Boston,
Earth.
Massachusetts.
That's right. That is Boston. It's Beantown.
Yeah.
So she goes there because I think there's a ticking time clock of, like, in a few days they're going to shut down the program if they can't find the magic or whatever.
Yeah.
So she opens up a portal. She gets a lift from a trucker,
Female truck driver.
a female truck driver. And honestly,
I don't care. It's just it's just funny that it's like, okay.
It is, but I could have watched an entire movie of the truck driver and Eleanor just like on the road.
That would have been funny. That would have been funny. Yeah.
Because all of their stuff is just pure comedy, and like, what the hell are you talking about?
It would
And
have been good if it was like another former SNL member, a female member, or something like Mary Gross or something. I don't know. Jan
oh yeah.
Hooks.
Although I don't know the actress, but I thought she was, she was great.
She was
Like
great.
I
Yeah,
didn't just want to see the character. I wanted to see her,
she was
because
great. She had some great like just silent reactions to Jillian Bell. Yeah.
yeah, it was one of the more realistic depictions of a
Hmm.
comedic, ask that I've
Right.
seen.
Right.
Um, so she goes to meet Eleanor, and this is another thing. Like when Eleanor is a producer at a local TV news station that has resorted to sensationalist news
Yeah.
reporting, and I love that we came in number 5, but there's only 4 stations, that kind of thing. And I liked the in the office intrigue of people trying to push positive news stories versus negative news stories, and would that work? I was more interested in that than the whole fairy tale angle. The love interest sort of is a guy named Hugh Prince.
The character. Yeah. Yeah.
The character that
Hmm.
Mackenzie doesn't
Played by Santiago Cabrera.
yeah, I thought he was good. Like
Yeah.
all of this stuff that doesn't involve the actual like love kind of plot of this movie, I really dug. I thought it was
Yeah.
funny when they go to a like a local sports ball game, and Eleanor slides down a hill on a sled and crashes into the news crew while they're doing reporting, and then they go viral, and that leads to a whole other thing.
Yeah.
That's all. It's fun.
Yeah, she's been there for like 3 days, and each event that news event shows up, she's been involved in because everything goes viral. And the fireworks during the tailgating party for I couldn't tell. I guess it was the Bruins. I don't know. I'm not up to date with sports
Yeah,
teams, but
it was somebody
Boston
else.
Bruins, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, and that the whole work setting was interesting. There wasn't anything like overtly predictable or cliche about it as far as inter-office, characters. There's no established inter-office romance, which is great. Right away, you didn't really expect her colleague, this Hugh Prince guy, to really be interested in her, but it felt like one of those situations where, well, this coworker is has always been around me, and I guess I just didn't realize, that he could be an interest, or she could be an interest. Oh, okay.
Well,
You get a little bit of that.
but it's also, we find out, eventually that her husband died 4 years ago, and she's been
Right.
so wrapped up in being a single mom and
Sure.
mourning his loss that she hasn't really had men on the radar.
Right.
Which it's an interesting angle to pursue. But, my main problem with Mackenzie is the way that she's written, not necessarily the portrayal by Isla
Yeah.
Fisher, because I think she
She
delivers
did a
what
good job.
she does well according to the role. It's just that the part seems overtly mean and just not pleasant, but beyond like depressed, but just acerbic. I
Yeah.
I didn't take notes during this, which I usually do. We were just kind of watching in bed
Yeah.
last night. But there was a scene where she just was. Oh, it was the when she runs into Hugh, and he's dressed up as John Adams because he's a
Yeah. She's just kind
reenactor.
of mean.
She's mean to him. Like, oh,
Like, why are you making fun
seriously?
of a guy who's dressing up for reenactment? I mean, it is Boston. I'm sure they do this all the time.
Right. And
Yeah,
I want to
I
stand
don't.
up for reenactors. I used to be
Yeah.
one.
No. Okay.
But
That's another podcast.
yes.
But I mean, it's like, is that really in an age of cosplay? Is that really such a weird thing? I mean, come on. I have coworkers,
Especially because they probably covered that for their news
right?
program,
I mean, I
conventions
have
and things. Yeah.
coworkers who on the side, they do cosplay at conventions, and they're like, "Oh, don't tell anybody at work." I'm like, "Okay, but what's the big deal?" It's just I don't understand. It was her acerbic nature was, I could understand to a certain point, but to interact like this to almost everybody, it's like, geez. I was a little disappointed in this whole dynamic of like how her crushed dreams, her kind of scar tissue from, understandably, from her, her marriage and her spouse dying, that kind of weighed heavily, but it also kind of bled out to her interaction with her girls and her
Yes.
parenting. It's like, wait a minute, you aren't really. it's not that she's not attentive, which can be the case when you're a single parent and you're working hard, you're trying to keep a career and you have two kids, or you're trying to be involved in your school and it's really hard, um, at a pandemic. But you know, but I just feel like even some of the kind of this quieter interactions, especially with the eldest child, who I would assume she's in like high school, maybe early
I
high
feel like
school,
she's like a freshman or a
maybe a
sophomore.
freshman, yeah,
Yeah.
who has issues with stage fright, yet she's got a great voice and some talent, and she really wants to get out there. But it almost seems like the Mackenzie as the mom is like, okay, you know what happened last time. It's probably not a good idea to try this again. It's like, what?
Which is, that's the reversal of what you see in these movies. Usually it's the daughter who would be like, well, you remember what happened last time, mom? And the
Right.
mom's like, you got to pick yourself up and this is a new opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a role reversal that, because I was thinking about this, it's even hard to imagine a mom saying that after the death of a father 4 years ago, because I assume from everything we see in the photo albums and the way they talk about dad when they do talk about him,
Mm-hmm.
that it was a happy kind of an
Yeah.
idyllic marriage. So
Yeah.
you think that, when she was raising these daughters, it was a happy situation, it was a nurturing situation. And then all of a sudden dad dies and everything goes like pitch black, like screw you and your
Yeah.
dreams. And, yeah, you're going to screw up just like you did last time. Don't bother.
Right. I mean, it did seem like at a happy, family unit. It's not like the kids ever said under their breath, well, he's dead, but he used to beat us all the time anyway. But it's not like, it was like that. But yeah, I just wish, and maybe, hey, maybe we're sitting here complaining, but it is kind of subverting our expectations, right? For
But
this to be
that
a negative, just to have a negative impact on your kids. I don't know.
And this is why I kind of alluded to in my rant that opened the show. This is not a smart movie for the reasons we discussed in terms of the basic premise, but I also don't think that it has emotional intelligence. I feel like it wants to make some points and wants to put them out there, regardless of how those points match up or don't match up to the narrative that they're spinning. I think a more well thought out and honest movie would have found a way to deal with these kinds of issues in a way that we could relate to. Like, you can cut out all of that stuff of like, don't follow your dreams, by just reversing those roles. Sometimes expectations are there to not be subverted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
It might be cliche, but everything else in this movie is a cliche. So why not give the daughter stage fright because of what, the trauma she experienced, have the mom trying to get through to her, and then have the daughter say, well, I don't, you've given up on your dreams, mom, so why should I bother? And then that wakes mom up or something like that.
Yeah.
There are ways to do this so that you don't have to put a square peg in a round hole of trying to so hard to subvert expectations that you forget about the humanity of the people who are watching the material.
Right. I mean, there's certain expectations that are familiar, that are helpful to people, because that then the viewers are connecting to something that they recognize and they say, oh yeah, okay, it's going along like this. But yeah,
Exactly.
if you're blatantly trying to subvert the expectations, it's kind of, I don't know, it just seems like it can be distracting or jarring, and maybe giving it more recognition than it should, at least that element of the story.
It's the same day that we watched this, yesterday, we watched another movie. It's a Netflix original holiday film because there's like a million of them trying to compete with Hallmark. It's called Santa Girl.
Wow. Okay.
D-
There's
d-
so many I haven't caught up.
you don't even try
Is
and,
that they come out this year?
it's listed as 2019, but I think it's a newer thing on Netflix,
Okay.
so I don't know. But it's, Barry Bostwick stars as Santa
Oh,
Claus. Uh,
jeez.
and there are some parallels
Bro.
between that and Fat Man, really, which is the idea of
Wow.
Santa's workshop being a business. But the premise of the film is Santa has a daughter that she's like going to college, or she wants to go to college, but he wants to keep her sheltered to the North Pole because she's going to take over the family business.
Jeez.
So, but I'm saying that weird premise, predictable movie has more coherence to it, and then ultimately more emotional understanding than this thing, which is an actual bona fide Disney production. They sort of wrote the book on how to do these kind of romantic fairy tale fables, but
Mhm.
you've got this off-brand Netflix movie that did it 10 times better. I'm not recommending Santa Girl. I'm just saying if you're wondering, you want to watch Godmother and watch another example of what we're talking about, you could start with Santa Girl.
I was trying to insert a Megaforce joke, but I guess maybe not.
Megaforce?
Yeah, because Barry Bostwick was in that. But
there you go.
Yeah, it does seem like you could easily recycle some of these themes or storylines and just hey, let's inject this into a Christmas story. And this, I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is a Christmas movie. I mean, it didn't have to be, but it is. I mean, it's smack right dab in the middle of the holiday season.
And it does
which is
feel
interesting.
like, yeah, if it feels like if this were to come out in theaters, that this would have been like a November, December release, like landing right, where we're seeing it on Disney
either
Plus.
Thanksgiving weekend or in between. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's not like you have if it's a theatrical release, it's not like you have a big name to carry the movie. I mean, Jillian Bell is somewhat recognizable, but as far as I guess this probably would be her, if this was a theatrical release, this would probably be her biggest headliner.
Well, I mean, she had, I mean, that's true. I mean, Brittany
as far as a big studio.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, Brittany Runs a Marathon got some hype and recognition last year. But I agree, this would have been a good, theatrical vehicle for her. Mm-hmm. But I think back to like Kenneth Branagh's Cinderella. Mm-hmm. That had Lily James, who at that point wasn't like the biggest name. She's certainly had recognizable name, things coming off that. I feel like it's more of a situation where it's the Disney brand and the idea of the Disney, Disney turning itself on its head kind of a thing to draw people in.
I mean, it almost doesn't matter what type of or who's in the lead role of a Disney live action remake. I mean, it's not like the main character in the latest Mulan was the drawing factor. It's just the fact that it was a live action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was just the fact that it's a live action version of their classic animation hits. This is different. This is more along lines of what do you call it? The Maleficent. Mm-hmm. This is more along lines of that, where it's kind of like a one-off from something that's somewhat familiar, although that is drawing from Sleeping Beauty. This is, kind of a one-off from just the typical fantasy world that we're possibly used to. So it's taking a familiar character, as I mentioned, fairy godmothers, and giving them their own movie, basically. It is interesting to, as much as we can lament the kind of lack of world building and contextual history here, it is interesting to see this kind of, let's say, job of godmothering from the perspective of somebody who earnestly wants to do well in it and is going out of her way to make the job still relevant and make it more of a life path rather than a career. I mean, this is, she's, Jillian Bell's character, Eleanor, is very earnest. She's going out of her way to, she earnestly wants to help help fulfill young wish makers, let's say. And, I can respect that. And she has, if we're going to go back to my IMDb trivia comparison, she has the same kind of naivety and exuberance and excitement as Will Ferrell's Elf.
Or Amy Adams in Enchanted, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but as far as that, honestly, for some reason, I don't know why, but after a while, the kind of jarring, out of touchness, for lack of a better phrase, of her character with the real world kind of wore out its welcome for me, just because it's like, okay, because there's like a quick FaceTime reference from June Squibb's Agnes, where mm-hmm. she communicates with Eleanor through a grandmother clock, and her mm-hmm. face appears on the face of the clock, and it's like, you ever heard of FaceTime? And it's like, how is this old lady Agnes character more in touch with some of the modern technology than Eleanor? And it's a really a quick one-off joke and everything, but it's like, hey, wait a minute. I mean, this person doesn't even understand basic concepts like trucks and things on wheels and crossing guards or whatever, the traffic signals and football and food and what's a lobster. It's like, if you're grossed out by food, then what do you eat on this motherland? It's like, I don't know. It's like, it just seemed a little bit too much.
Well, it's like Edward Nygma said in Batman Forever, too many questions. Because I mean, that's exactly right. Even there seems to be an anachronism. I think it's the narrator lady pulling out a record of some kind and
Right.
playing it. I'm like, okay, so records exist. How recent an invention was that versus everything else seems to be, the references are 100, 200 years old,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So yeah, it's bothersome. And I'm constantly thinking about that throughout the movie because I don't know what these characters know.
Mhm.
I thinking about what this movie could have been and possibly should have been. I feel like if they had just had godmothers still doing their thing, because the ultimate message of the movie at the very end, I should mention that, of course, there is a school performance that's taking place during
Mhm.
the Christmas parade that the eldest daughter,
Mhm.
she was the stand-in or like the third lead or something, but everyone else was unable to make it. So it's her turn to step up and shine. But Eleanor and the family have to get her there, so they turn a watermelon into a carriage that flies and gets her there right in the time to sing
I
this song.
Yeah,
The the most imaginative thing I think about that was that when you see inside the watermelon carriage,
that was
there's
awesome.
the recessed buttons in the upholstery look kind of like seeds.
And I do like the fact that they're all in the watermelon, but Eleanor forgot like what's going to actually propel this
Yeah,
watermelon, and so they didn't have any horses or anything. And so
yeah, it's
I was
cute.
expecting them to make it, take a local street rat and make it a giant rat that that would have been like terrorizing everybody. But that's a different tone of a movie, I guess.
It is, but again, I'm just thinking through all of this because first of all, they're in the middle of this downtown area when they realize that they have to get to the performance, but they say, "Oh my God, the performance is starting in 10 minutes, but we have to get all the way downtown." I'm like, "Aren't you downtown?" Whatever. So they
Yeah,
get the carriage, it takes
wind up
off down this
flying.
it takes off down the street and then flying, and it actually flies into the parade and nearly collides with the marching band.
Right, right, right.
Now, at this point, the marching band sees this near collision,
Mhm.
experiences it, but keeps on marching. No,
Yeah.
everyone ducks for cover, starts screaming, "What the hell is that?" I know it's a Disney movie, so they'd be like, "What the heck is that?" But again, there's no sense of like fear or urgency or anything.
Or no even time for that. I mean, it's not even acknowledged.
Right.
It's not even yeah. It's not even there's no sense of it. There's no time for it. So it's like okay.
Right. So they get up onto the stage. I don't know the song that she was singing. Was that supposed to be one of her original songs?
I don't either.
Because here's the thing. She gets out onto the stage. She goes up to the microphone. There's a full choir behind her,
Uh-huh.
and she's supposed to start singing. She gets the nerves. Mom comes up, hands her the guitar that was her dad's guitar that she plays on. It's very sentimental. And so
Uh-huh.
she starts plucking away and singing what I think is supposed to be an original song. It's not a holiday song,
It
but then
but
but
it
the rest of the
doesn't. Yeah, but then you go into Joy to the World, so it's yeah.
because I joked to my wife when the choir starts singing "Joy to the World," it's like "Joy to the World." This is the song we're supposed to be singing. Whatever
Right.
you're doing kind of sucks. Um, but it doesn't
Ooh.
end there because Jane Curtin shows up and there's a big Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey style confrontation on the stage with this bewildered audience watching.
And the audience is just like, cool, man.
Yeah, like, wow, this is really great special effects for a crappy little
Right.
town. Um, but this is where the message part of the movie really comes in, and it's all about, everything about the prince coming in to save
The
the
happily
the
ever
harem.
after.
Right,
Yeah.
that's old fashioned and we need to do away with that, and there's
Mhm.
people of all shapes and sizes and colors and types of love, and love is
Yeah.
love and all this other messages that I happen to agree with, by the way,
Yeah.
but what I take exception to, and you see this in a lot of the conversation in the culture right now, is the idea of, because something is old fashioned, that it needs to be sort of swept away instead of incorporated into this narrative of accepting, all forms of love. Because you go out to the audience and it's like, who loves who? And it's like this little boy saying, "I love you, Auntie." And then you go to the gay
You
couple
guys,
saying, "I love you, Sebastian." And then you cut to uh, Hugh
the
Prince in the
reporter
audience,
guy,
the reporter, and he holds up his phone. He's like, "I love you, son." And it's like, no, this is where you're supposed to profess your love for
right,
Mackenzie.
right,
But it's like, no, he's just going to be, kind of the best friend. Maybe they'll date or whatever.
yeah,
But again, it's the subverting of expectations. So it's like at the end, you've got this family of girls all hugging and loving each other. And the kind of implied message is, we don't really need a man, which is fine. Not everybody does.
yeah,
But there is also room for traditional family romantic love.
right.
And I just feel like it's a very strange message this movie is stepping up to the line of explicitly saying, but delivering some other messages in what they're not saying.
Yeah, I mean, there are hints at acknowledging this kind of old school happily ever after mentality of, uh, yeah, I guess again, context for this would have been helpful. Maybe for so long the godmothers saw this phrase happily ever after as a young girl hooking up with her prince. Because we're sticking with, fairy tale, terminology and jargon and all that.
Mhm.
We have to match up princesses with princes and, and then they can be happily ever after. And so that's why it wouldn't be so out of touch that, Jane Curtin's character, Mora, uh, could then be kind of shocked at this concept of like, what do you mean happily ever after isn't finding a mate or companion or a prince for a princess. This is what we've been doing all this time and it's worked. And yeah, I guess in a way maybe this concept of love can be more than just what we've been doing this whole time. Maybe that element could have been more heavy handed,
And
like that reimagining.
right. And I think what I started to make a point and I lost it in my nonsense, but I was thinking a cooler version of this movie would be not that godmothers are in danger of going extinct. It's that they've been doing what they've been doing for such a they keep doing it for such a long time. Then you get this young upstart who believes that there is more to love than the traditional,
Yeah,
man woman relationship happily ever after,
right.
and goes through the process of trying to convince them by finding examples in the world and making those kinds of connections, and
Yeah.
then changing the attitude that way so that it's an all-encompassing narrative rather than one that ends up being kind of exclusionary.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, the main character wouldn't be so world naive. Then, I mean, she would be
Yeah.
more familiar with like, okay, what's happening out there? How can I hone up my knowledge in order to be more effective for whoever is wishing? Um, yeah, that's one of the things that kind of dawned on me as the movie unfolds. Like she just becomes, the repetitively naive. It's like, man, if you would have just studied up on the world a little bit more, maybe you could be more relevant and helpful to these people you're trying to help. I don't know.
It could even be that the older godmothers, and this may be going back to the ageist thing, but maybe Jillian Bell is so knowledgeable of the world that she has trouble. It's kind of like trying to teach your mom or your grandmother how to use an iPhone, that kind of
Right,
thing. They're
right.
so out of step with the way that the cultures have moved on, and even just the kind of global narrative, because ultimately this movie really wants to be woke, but if you talk about subverting expectations, you still have a Disney movie with a bunch of white women walking around, like white straight women
There's that.
delivering. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of like what happened with the Melissa McCarthy superintelligence movie, where that is a very woke narrative, but it comes down to, well, Melissa McCarthy, you didn't have to star in this vehicle. You could have found a young, instead of the most average woman on the planet being a former Yahoo startup founder, could have been a Bangladeshi dressmaker somewhere,
Yeah. 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 They could have been. That could have been average too. Um, yeah. So I think overall, I mean, there is some things to enjoy in this movie. if you consider not just the target audience, but what what it can do on an entertainment level.
Yeah.
I mean, is the themes, they are kind of heavy-handed, and they are kind of somewhat totally tonally kind of zigzagging, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, I enjoyed seeing, I enjoyed the kids. I enjoyed seeing them. I mean, the older teenager your wasn't too much of your typical snarky teenager. I liked some of the things that Jillian Bell was doing to try and go out of her way to be helpful, that just didn't really work. She changed Mackenzie and her family's interior apartment, or townhome, into like this medieval kind of lavish place. Yeah.
Mackenzie says, "You turned my house into medieval times."
Yeah. It's like, it's like, and that would make sense because this would be something that was extravagant to her.
Yeah.
And big gowns are no big deal to her. So I guess a little bit of that kind of fish out of water would go a long way for me in this kind of story. So, I mean, I think that this will get a lot of, viewers from a Disney Plus type of, a platform. I don't know how well it would have done in theaters, just because, again, we're not going with a regular, and not that I think we should totally stick with just recognizable intellectual property or whatever, but I don't know, Godmothered in theaters seems like, I don't know what what the draw would be there. But
Well, I mean, but here's the thing: like this particular movie, I agree that I don't think that's a draw. But yeah, as we talked about Maleficent, we talked about
mhm,
Cinderella, both beyond expectations,
and did
big
well.
hits. Yeah, big, and you could look at those in a certain way as following, a certain formula. Even though Maleficent said, "Okay, we're going to tell this story from the villain's perspective,"
Yeah,
it does follow the track of a traditional Disney movie in a lot
yeah,
of ways.
yeah,
And the key is you get wonderful performances, great sets and special effects,
mhm,
and a solid story. It doesn't have to be A plus mind blowing, but just solid, and you
yeah,
can have a hit. I think if
yeah,
this thing came to theaters, there might have been some positive press around it because of the type of message it's trying to convey.
mhm,
But I feel like actual audience is going to see that. I don't think they're going to come out and say, "Man, you have to go see Godmothered."
yeah. I'll go see this cute movie. Um, yeah. So overall, I mean, I'm glad to see Jillian Bell get some roles like this. That she can really sink her teeth into. I think she's really good playing this earnest character here. I wish there was a little bit more nuance or complexity to her. Um, yeah. So I don't know. Overall, um, I think I would maybe watch it again with my daughter just to like, see if she'd be into it. But she might even be at 14. She might even be too old for this. But even though there is pretty much like a 14-year-old in here, um, yeah. But overall, it's I was entertained. I just wish, kind of like what you're saying, I wish there was a little bit more here. Um, there's more. There's definitely more to mine here, I think.
I appreciated this movie as a mental exercise. 'Cause I was definitely not checked out during
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Even the parts that I like, which I agree. I think Jillian Bell is great in here. I think everyone is really good in this movie. I just wish it was in service of better material. But I
yeah,
was constantly thinking about what I was watching and invested in it and challenging myself. Like, why do I feel this way about what I'm seeing? But I just can't recommend it as, if you wanted, I could come up with probably 10 other Disney films that aren't even the traditional classic ones. I'm not saying, yeah, go back and
yeah.
watch the original Cinderella or Snow White because those are the models of how things should be. I'm just saying
Or
there are other,
yeah.
smart films in the Disney canon that far surpass this.
I mean, even a recent remake, like relatively recent, like Pete's Dragon, I would recommend. Because it does something different from the source material. But, you know, hey, look, this isn't another live action remake of a Disney classic. At least there's that. And, you know, I think it is trying to do something somewhat different from a recognizable, you know, fantasy character. So I did also find the idea that, or the casting kind of funny, that her boss at the news station is played by Jillian Bell's love interest in Brittany Runs a Marathon, Utkarsh Umbakar.
That's where I knew him
Budkar.
from.
Yeah.
He was like
Right.
bells going
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
all over the place. That's
He's in
right.
He's in the Pitch Perfect movies. But when I saw that, oh yeah, he was also in Brittany Runs a Marathon, that makes sense. You know, I'm sure. Yeah, this is kind of funny.
Yeah, I'm on record as not having cared for Brittany Runs a Marathon, partially because of the way that the character of Brittany was written in that movie. But it's so frustrating because I love Jillian Bell, even in movies where I don't like her characters. I think that's a testament to what I feel
we go
about
again.
her.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think she has a really, even like the character in this movie is earnest, but even as a person, as an actor, I feel like she is fully committed to whatever role she takes on, and there's that is an earnestness right there. So that really bleeds through.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's Godmothered, I guess.
We've been Godmothered.
I could just see that as being like the promo T-shirt if they'd been at the theater.
Right.
Like, you've been Godmothered.
You've been Godmothered.
Like yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a thing. So, all right, sir. Thanks again for talking about this movie. This is a more positive conversation than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And a longer one too. At first I was like, I don't know if there's much to talk about, but there kind of is. And yeah, it's been fun. So thanks again, sir. We'll talk more about something else very soon.
I'm sure.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.